So this is the lesson for 4-2. What we're doing today is evaluating functions. Evaluate just means to solve, all right? So we are solving functions today. It's very, very similar. It's very, very similar to what we did with graphing earlier on in the last chapter. So the first thing is you have to know some notation. The notation that you need to know is that the f of x is the same thing as y equals, all right? F of x is the same thing as y equals. Sometimes you're going to see f of x. Sometimes you might see g of x or h of x or things like that. All of those things mean y equals. F of x is just a sort of more mature, mathematically speaking, a more mature way to write things instead of y equals. So there are 3 different types of questions today. Here's the first type. What you're going to do is sub in the number that's inside the parentheses in for x, and then find the answer. So in this first one, we're given the equation f of x equals 2x plus 1. We want to know what the f of 3 is. So all that you're going to do is you're going to take this number that's inside parentheses, the 3, and you are going to take and sub it in for x. Now, don't make the rookie mistake. The rookie mistake, what some people all of a sudden for some reason think is, oh, okay, so I'm going to sub in this 3 in for x, and that means I'm going to have 23 plus 1. It is not 23 plus 1. Remember that when a number is next to a letter, that really means times. So that's really 2 times x plus 1. So when I go to sub in my 3, it's not 23, it's 2 times 3 plus 1. You could take that and type it in exactly how it is right into the calculator all at once. 2 times 3 plus 1. Or you could do it in your head. 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. And that is what our answer is. Make sure if you start doing these in your head, make sure that you do the multiplying before you do the adding or subtracting. You have to follow order of operations, PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, however you want to say it. You have to do the multiplying first before you do the adding, subtracting. So let's take a look at this second one. Again, what you're going to do is take the number that's inside the parentheses and you're going to sub it in for x. So instead of 3 times x, we have 3 times -4. Now, there's more than one way to write times. Some people do times using the dot, like I did in the first question. Some people use parentheses to mean times. So 3 times -4 like that, minus 1. Again, you could take and type this whole thing right into the calculator all at once. 3 times -4 minus 1. 3 times -4 is -12. Minus 1 is -13. Go ahead and try this third one on your own, please. It should take you all of about 5 seconds to do. All right. All that you're doing is taking this 10 and subbing it in for x. So instead of x plus 4, we have 10 plus 4. This one you didn't need to multiply anything. So 10 plus 4 is 14. So this is the first type of question that you're going to have today. You're just taking the number that's inside the parentheses and subbing it in for x. Let's take a look at the second type of question that you're going to have today. Now, the second type of question should look very, very familiar to you. Back in chapter 3, when we were graphing lines, you had tables that looked just like these. You had your x values of 0, 1, and 2. You had to take and sub those numbers in for x, just like we're going to do. But then you had a y column. Instead of having f of x, you had a y column. Or instead of having g of x, you had a y column. Or instead of f of x, you had a y column. Remember that f of x or g of x is just the same exact thing as y. So you're going to do these just like you did in the previous chapter. You're going to take your x values here of 0, 1, and 2, and you're going to take and sub them in for x. So instead of 5 times x plus 3, we're going to have 5 times 0 plus 3. Instead of 5 times x plus 3, we're going to have 5 times 1 plus 3. Instead of 5 times x plus 3, we're going to have 5 times 2 plus 3. Again, all that we're doing is taking our x values and subbing them in for x. Whatever you get for an answer for these goes into your f of x column, which is really your y column. So you could type these right into the calculator, again, exactly how they look, or you can do them in your head. Just make sure that you do the multiplying first before you do the adding or subtracting. So 5 times 0 is 0, plus 3 is 3. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 3 is 8. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 3 is 13. And we're not graphing anything like we did in the last chapter. All you're doing is filling out the table. Now you have to be careful. You're not always going to have 0, 1, and 2. Sometimes we might have just random numbers like this one has 5, 8, and 11. Again, what you're going to do is sub them in for x. So instead of x plus 1, I have 5 plus 1. Instead of x plus 1, I have 8 plus 1. Instead of x plus 1, I have 11 plus 1. Again, whatever your answer is, we're going to put it in that third column. So we're going to have 5 plus 1. 5 plus 1 is 6. Instead of x plus 1, we have 8 plus 1, which is 9. And instead of x plus 1, we have 11 plus 1, which is 12. Go ahead and try this third one on your own, please. Go ahead and try the third one on your own, please. So this one might take you a little bit longer to do because it's a little bit more complicated than these other two were. What you have is you have -2, 0, and 5 in your x column. We're taking those numbers and subbing them in for x. So we have -2. I'm going to use parentheses this time. It doesn't matter whether you use parentheses or a dot. -2 times -2 instead of -2 times x minus 3. -2 times 0 minus 3. And we have -2 times 5 minus 3. So whatever you get for an answer, you put it in that third column. -2 times -2 is +4. 4 minus 3 is 1. -2 times 0 is 0. Minus 3 is -3. -2 times 5 is -10. Minus 3 is -13. So again, these were just like filling out the chart when we were graphing lines using the chart method. Questions on any of these three? Taking a look at the last type of problem. Now, the last column or the last type of problem went up and down. These go side to side. You're going to do them the same exact way. You have your x values. This time we have 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And where we're going to sub them into is in for x. So we're going to take each number individually and sub it in for x. So instead of 10 times x, we have 10 times 0, which is 0. Instead of 10 times x, we have 10 times 1, which is 10. Instead of 10 times x, we have 10 times 2, which is 20. Instead of 10 times x, we have 10 times 3, which is 30. Instead of 10 times x, we have 10 times 4, which is 40. So you're just going to take each number individually and sub it in for x. Let's take a look at the second one. Now, you're not always going to have consecutive numbers. This one has some random numbers, -3, 0, 5, and 7. But again, we're going to take all those numbers and sub them in for x. So we're going to have 2 times -3, which is -6, plus 5 is -1. 2 times 0, which is 0, plus 5 is 5. 2 times 5, which is 10, plus 5, which is 15. 2 times 7, which is 14, plus 5 is 19. So you're just taking each of these numbers and individually subbing them in for x. Go ahead and try that third one on your own, please. So this one's actually a little bit easier because when we go to sub in our x values, there's no multiplying in this one, all right? We just have whatever your x value is minus 8. So we have 5 minus 8, which is -3. We have 7 minus 8, which is -1. We have 12 minus 8, which is 4. We have 20 minus 8, which is 12. And we have 25 minus 8, which is 17. So we're just taking these numbers for x and subbing them in. Now, there's one more thing that I want to show you. Sometimes these questions are called input and output tables. Sometimes on like the state test or like on your Regents exam next year, you might see these written as input and output instead of x and f of x, or input and output instead of x and y. All of those things mean the same thing. It's just a sort of a different way of writing them, but they all mean the same thing. You're taking your x or your input, subbing them in for x, and then figuring out what your answer is and putting it in the output or f of x or y column. Now, there's one question on your homework that I definitely want to talk about. There's one question on your homework that looks like this. I forget what the plus or minus was. We're just going to say it was +3. When you have a negative x, think about when you have an equation, what number when you have an x is really in front of that x. When you just have an x, there's really a 1 in front of that. So when you have a negative x plus or minus a number, that negative x really means -1 times x. There's one on your homework that looks like that fools a lot of people. So negative x really means -1 times x. Please remember that a negative times a negative is a positive. All right, that's fooled a lot of people as well.